The name Vasper basically stands for vascular performance. That's where it came from. Our human is basically a human animal. When we've designed this thing, we sort of design it to bring out your animal instinct. When you're hormonally balanced and you're emotionally balanced, you start thinking from inside out as well.
Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything, from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And this morning we have with us Peter Wasowski. So good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Jillian.
Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm honored.
So, Peter, you've got over 35 years in the field of medical technology and vascular health, according to your NASA speaker bio profile. You're the founder and CEO of Vasper Technologies, which folks can find out more information about at vasper.com, VASPER. And Vasper you've produced a physical medicine device based on a recumbent bike that incorporates compression, cooling, and interval training and is getting impressive results for muscle strengthening, hormone balance, sleep, mood, multiple sclerosis, chronic disease, trauma, even in 94-year-old women. It's really impressive. And beyond your work with Olympic and professional athletes, Navy SEALs, and NASA, you really bring a metaphysical approach to health and wellness, the whole performance of the whole person. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, moving from physical to metaphysical and back to physical. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
I'm curious, where did you get your initial interest in health?
I grew up in Poland and came to this country in 1962 when I was 13. Mm-hmm. I will be 72 in a few days.
Happy birthday.
So, thank you. My mother was actually involved in medical technology and medical field, so I got a very early start. Eventually, I became a physician's assistant to a neurosurgeon. And this was way back in 1973 when I was 23 years old. Mm-hmm. And this was at a time before CT and before MRI were invented. The only way you could actually localize a brain tumor was by doing two very aggressive and traumatic to a patient procedures. The first one was called pneumoencephalogram, where you basically inject 20 cc's of air into the spinal column, and the air bubbles up to the top of the brain, and then you would shoot x-rays so you could see the top of the ventricle structure, and then the chair would rotate 45 degrees, so the patient's nose was pointing towards the floor, and the air would bubble up to the back of the ventricle so you could see the posterior ventricles, and then you would rotate it with the patient looking up at the ceiling. The air would bubble up to the front, and you would shoot with X-ray, of course, you would have the air density would show up very well. Mm-hmm. So this was a way to find out if there was any tumor present inside the ventricular system. And then you would send a patient home for about 5 to 6 weeks so he could recover from the severe, very, very lengthy headache. And then he would come back and he would do an angiogram to look at the angiogenesis and the blood supply to the tumor. The problem was that during that time, the tumor, of course, would grow. And if the tumor would get into the motor strip right in this area, of course, it was considered inoperable. So we would very often get into the tumor and find out we should not have gotten in there because the borders of the tumor changed. So this neurosurgeon and I came up with a technique and a piece of equipment back in 1973 to do both of these procedures within 45 minutes.
Wow.
And that basically involved the table that actually came in 3 sections. We started with an angio at that point. After we finished with an angio, the table would fold with a patient on it and become a chair. And then immediately we would, with extra local anesthetic, we would complete the other study. So we would have real-time idea of exactly where the tumor borders were, and we could plan the surgery. So back then, Siemens, which was a German company that was building that equipment, they were selling it for $650,000, which is an insane amount of money in today's dollars. They needed somebody to fly around the world and train physicians how to use that technique. I was the only person available for them to hire. So I sort of switched my career path because I was planning to become a neurosurgeon back then. And I got into the kitchen side of medicine in designing equipment. And I very quickly found out that there's a huge communication problem where you have a physician and an engineer in the same room, because they speak different languages. Basically, there's a lot of egos and strong opinions involved. So there was a tremendous amount of time and money wasted trying to design a product. So I knew the anatomy and physiology quite well. In a relatively short time, I learned the engineering part of it. So I was very useful as an interpreter between those two professionals that came from a completely different training and experience. So that actually enabled the company, in first case Siemens, and then I switched to General Electric in both cases. The whole process of designing a product and installing it in a hospital, getting the results that everybody was expecting was less expensive and took less time. So that's how I got into what I refer to as kitchen side of medicine. And I've spent, the NASA information you read is about 10 years old, so about 45 years now, working on the design side, designing equipment and basically putting it in use.
That's amazing. You're exactly right. When we talk about medicine, we often talk about how medicine exists in silos, right? So there's the silo of cardiology or the specialty of cardiology, the specialty of neurology, but there's also the silo between medicine and the rest of our sciences. So engineering and climatology and social and political sciences, these are also siloed. So to have somebody who can bridge both worlds is pretty unique. So what a fantastic career.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it started back in the days where we had VCRs. Remember, and the VCR was very difficult to operate because it was designed by an engineer.
Yes. I never learned to work them. I just waited for them to go away. Right. Tell us about the origins of Vasper.
I was involved in mostly medical imaging technologies. First, it started with digital angiography and digital X-ray, and then went on to the MRI. There was actually a group of people that started a small company in Silicon Valley that built MRI scanners, and I was doing their clinical development. I was also one of the investors. And then after my stint with General Electric, which was in Europe, actually, I had an office in Germany and another office in London. And I met my wife in London. We got married. Later on, when she was pregnant with our first child, I took some time off. I basically took a sabbatical for 2.5 years and came back to California. And during that time, I met a gentleman that designed different parts of spacesuits for NASA. His name was Bill Elkins. He actually, I think, had a lot to do with the spacesuit that John Glenn was wearing when he went on his first space flight. Bill basically designed the cooling part of the technology for a spacesuit. So, of course, when you put an astronaut in space, it's pretty much impossible to cool him with air. Besides, air is a temperature insulator, not a temperature conductor. Liquid is a temperature conductor. So Bill came up with a very unique way of cooling the astronauts, and he started using it totally by accident, using it to treat people with multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is a disease that is heat sensitive. People that have MS in this country, probably a lot of them live in your area because it's cooler. And you don't find people with MS in Hawaii or Arizona because they don't do very well. So he had a piece of equipment that was specifically designed to increase the quality of life for people with MS. The problem was that he couldn't really make a lot of sales with this piece of equipment simply because people with MS usually are living on supplemental income and don't have the kind of extra resources to spend money on equipment, even though it helps. So I convinced him to go into professional sports and replace ice with a piece of equipment that did not result in vasoconstriction and possibly nerve damage if you keep ice more than 20 minutes. So we did that, and we designed different types of wearables that were designed strictly for joint injuries, to heal joint injuries. That product is known as Game Ready. The most unique part of it was, number one, that it did not use ice, so there was no vasoconstriction, and you could actually cool the blood underneath the skin, do very effective cooling of the injury. and lowering the metabolic rate. But one of the more impressive part of that piece of equipment was that it worked on an aircraft. So you can imagine if an athlete goes away to play a game away from home and he gets injured at that game, when he flies back home at 30,000 feet, that cabin is at 8,000 feet. So that injury actually expands and can get significantly worse when the aircraft lands. Piece of equipment we designed actually healed that injury in flight, which was very valuable. We sold that company to Lee Steinberg. If you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, it's based on Lee Steinberg's life story. When we sold the company, I moved to the Big Island of Hawaii with my wife and 2 children. They were pre-high school at that point. And I was looking forward to this amazing retirement and a lot of time on the beach. I was 50 years old. What I found out when I started living in the tropics is that my own 2 health issues became quite a big problem. I had traumatic arthritis in both ankles, triangular fractures, post-true triangular fractures. So the pain of arthritis became much more severe, and I was also pre-diabetic. I flunked my glucose tolerance test since I was 11 years old. Again, in the tropics, the heat, humidity did a number on my ankles. I remember trying to make it to the bathroom at night. I would have to go on my hands and knees. I couldn't put any weight on my feet. I needed to do something to address my own quality of life, and I knew that taking pain meds and going on insulin was not going to improve my life. It was going to take it the other way. So I decided to design something that addresses the root cause rather than treat symptoms, and that's how Vasper became a product. The name Vasper basically stands for vascular performance. That's where it came from. So I built a very, very crude prototype, set up a lab, which is a separate building on our property on Hawaii that we still have, and started using it. And after about 2 weeks of using a crude prototype every day, I noticed that my pain was basically going away and then disappeared completely. And then for the first time in 41 years, I passed my glucose tolerance test without any issues and without any drugs. So I knew that I was onto something. And then it took 8 years from that point to actually come up with a piece of equipment that could be tested and used and then eventually put into manufacturing. The co-founder of this company is my son. So he's going to carry on the torch as we move on. He's only 35 years old. He works here. He's also an Ayurvedic practitioner. Dr. Lad was one of his professors when he was studying. To me, he's a real idol of what a real doctor should be. Look at the entire body, not just one thing.
Absolutely. And that has been my experience of studying with Dr. Vasant Lad, where I take my lineage from, is everything that he has taught. I went into medicine because of Ayurveda. Part of the reasons behind these podcasts is the idea that we just say the word Ayurveda, that we talk about it, that we discuss medicine in a different way. So let's talk about the 3 principles behind Vasper's impact.
Right. So the first one has to do with blood flow restriction exercise, known as BFR. And that's basically based on design technology known as biomimicry, imitating nature. If you can visualize, of course, you have a child. If you see 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, you never see those people walking. They're always going full speed ahead. Mm-hmm. If you were to look into their upper legs, into their quads, you would see highly concentrated lactate. And the reason the lactic acid gets concentrated in a child is simply because of their size. They have small bodies, short legs, small muscles, and they burn up those muscles in real time. So the higher the concentration, not the amount, the higher the concentration of lactic acid in the muscle tissue, the stronger the feedback to the pituitary gland, requesting additional hormone levels to rebuild the muscle back to pre-exercise condition. Mm-hmm. And of course, children already have a high level of growth hormone because they're growing. So they're boosting this hormone level even more by being very active. And of course, when they run around like this all day, they sleep very well at night. And at night, between the second and third stage of sleep, the pituitary gland puts out 50%, 50% of our daily hormone levels get actually released at night. So children always get it. Most adults do not. And this is why coffee business is doing well and energy drink business is doing well. We wake up in the morning having missed 50% of our rejuvenative hormones, and we need to kickstart the brain with caffeine or whatever it takes. Of course, your child will never ask you for coffee when they get up, right? They're full of energy and they do it all over again. Mm-hmm. So we are extremely resilient from the time we're born to the time you go through puberty. And once you go through puberty, there's three things that take you backwards. First, you have more real estate in those legs, so you can no longer concentrate lactate like you did as a child. Second is you're closer to your adult height, so your natural hormone levels are dropping because you're arriving at your genetically prescribed height. And of course, the third issue is that you don't have time to run around all day at that time. So every 10 years, there's a significant decrease in that stimulating signal of highly concentrated lactate to the pituitary gland. So there's a significant drop in the hormonal production as we age. So when aches and pains don't go away anymore and things, this age-related symptoms start happening, and you go to a medical professional, most of the time they will look at you and say, well, this is completely normal. You're just getting older, so your hormone levels are normal for your age. But the truth is that our hormones don't decline because we age. We age because our hormones decline. What we have done with Vasper is by applying liquid-cooled compression to the quads and biceps, we're actually slowing down the removal of lactic acid from the muscle through the peripheral veins. So we slow down what's known as peripheral venous return, and therefore forcing a high concentration of lactate under the compression. And when that happens, concentration of lactate in the blood goes up, so the pituitary gets a signal similar to what it would get if you ran up a huge mountain and did CrossFit on top of it. So the pituitary then responds as though you actually did that. And it starts generating additional hormone levels. And this is your own hormone, not the hormone you inject. It's your own hormone levels. So what we know as downstream anabolic effect, which is the effect the pituitary gland, being a master gland, has on the downstream hormones, which is DHEA, insulin growth factor 1, testosterone. All of those, thyroid, all the hormones that are downstream from pituitary gland are regulated by pituitary gland. So all those hormones come up in concert. That is known as of course, endogenous, which is from inside out hormonal balance and increase in hormonal production. And that has a very, very significant effect on healing and has very significant effect on other factors. One of them is sleep. When your natural anabolic hormones go up, the catabolic hormones, which is cortisol or stress hormone, actually goes down. So we have seen significant drop in nighttime cortisol levels. So the lower your stress hormone is at night, the better you will sleep. So one of the biggest, most reported benefit of use of Vasper is significant increase in the quality of sleep. So when he started working with soldiers, for example, they very often, before they get into their shower, they put on a pot of coffee because they know they will need it after the shower. And when they started using Vasper, they would just forget drinking it because they did get that second release at night. So that's the first principle. The second principle has to do with temperature control. So normally, of course, when we exercise, we sweat. In order for us to sweat, there's a significant amount of blood that needs to be shunted to the surface of the skin in order to produce sweat, in order to actually cool the body naturally, which is through evaporative cooling. And the skin is the biggest organ in the body. We have about 6.5 million pores, and each one of us has a very specific amount of blood on board, which happens to be 8% of your body weight. So if you're looking at a 100-pound person, there's 8 pounds of blood in there. And if that person exercises with intensity, significant amount of that blood goes to the skin, which means you don't have enough blood at the muscle level to repair the microtrauma to the muscle during intense exercise. This is why we have sore muscles for 1 or 2 days after intense exercise. So that's one part of it. The other side of it is that when your core body temperature goes up and you sweat, the blood temperature goes up as well. And blood, as we know, is mostly water. So when the blood temperature goes up, the blood starts releasing blood oxygen, just like water would when you heat it on a stove. Of course, this is on a different scale, but it's nonetheless the blood oxygen is being released. So the less blood oxygen you have on board, the less you can perform. Blood oxygen is the fuel for the muscle tissue. Those are the two negatives of conventional exercise. One is that you have sore muscles from not having enough blood there. And the second one is that when you sweat, of course, you don't have the blood that's needed to remove the lactate and clear the lactic acid out of the muscle tissue and so forth. Mm-hmm. So this is why most people don't enjoy exercise. If you look at this population of our country, we have about 20% of our population that apparently owns gym memberships, and most of those people just pay the money and don't show up. That has a tremendous effect on how healthy we are, because any physician will tell you that exercise is an integral part of health. When people come for Vasper, we give them 3 Vasper sessions at zero cost, but they need to do those 3 sessions within first week. Some of those people show up later and said, "You guys work like drug dealers because we're now addicted." And that comes from the fact that there's no sweating. It's a very low impact exercise. And we can have a professional athlete, elite military, or our oldest user right now is 97 years old, and the youngest is 10 years old. So we can adjust the software to each individual person and give them, very significant outcomes. Those are the 2 principles behind it. The last principle has to do with electricity. Our body is an electrochemical device, of course. In mid-50s, going into 70s, there was a very well-known scientist who actually happened to be an orthopedic surgeon. His name was Robert Becker. He was trying to find cure for arthritis way back in mid-50s. To this day, we don't have cure for arthritis, but he learned tremendous amount. And he learned that autoimmune disease, like arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, all of those diseases came up very fast when we started manufacturing polymers. So when we started manufacturing synthetic carpets and synthetic clothing, and at the same time Robert sold shoes, we would pick up this massive amounts of static electricity, which is oxidant inflammatory energy inside our bodies. And then we go outside and there's rubber underneath the shoes, so we can no longer discharge that static electricity to the ground. And that's when autoimmune disease took off. And he went around the world and checked other countries, and he found that, for example, a country like India didn't really have any significant numbers with people with autoimmune disease. So he then quickly learned that in India at that time, most people were going around barefoot with cotton clothing. So they were discharging the static electricity to the ground, picking up negative electrons from the ground, and they were electrically balanced. And when you're electrically balanced, you're electrochemically balanced. So I used his research, and this is why when you're on Vasper's system, you're barefoot, you don't have any shoes on, and your feet are resting on brass plates. And underneath the brass plates, we have copper tubing with water that takes all the static electricity out of your body and brings back negative electrons, so you're electrically balanced. Some people ask me, what if somebody in front, that uses the machine before me has athlete's foot or some type of germs? Can I pick it up with my feet? The answer is no, because germs will not survive on copper or brass because of electrolysis. So we, of course, clean those plates between people, but this is why we chose brass. Mm-hmm. And we also cool your feet. And the reason we cool your feet is what happens when you are under a hot blanket. You're too hot. What do? You stick your foot out. So your feet are your thermostats and radiators at the same time. We figured out the temperature gradient that will give your thermostat correct setting on your feet, and you actually feel comfortable. It helps with, of course, reduction or elimination of sweat as well. So those are the 3 principles.
That's so interesting. I mean, it really is unique that you've put together a technology that treats both elite athletes and 97-year-olds. I think it really speaks to how cohesive a system we have across our lifespan, across gender. The process is the same for building muscle as well as for boosting hormone levels, balancing hormone levels.
Exactly. The beautiful thing about Vasper is that it lends itself very nicely to being studied with mainstream science. Mm-hmm. So if we were discussing acupuncture, meditation, yoga, all of these things are wonderful practices for improving your health, but they are very difficult, if not impossible, to study with mainstream science. Vasper is very easy to study with mainstream science because we're looking at blood flow, hormone levels, which are easily checked, core body temperature, perfusion. All of those things are very, very easily studied. So we have amazing clinical research that's not coming out. For example, for concussions, there was a 2-year study at Kanto Concussion Center in not far from Boston, that showed amazing results with Vasper for treatment of concussions without use of drugs. Mm. In Lubbock, Texas, there was a trial going on that shows incredible results with diabetics because we increased the IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, which triggers the pancreas to make your own insulin. Mm-hmm. And this is how I healed myself as well. It's a very, very exciting time in my life. I never thought that at 72 I would have as much fun as I am.
And so what are you excited about next? What's the next iteration for Vasper and for research and for you?
Well, there's a lot of things. I totally believe in this saying that there is no end to better. You can always do things better. And the next thing we're looking for is real-time physiological monitoring, artificial intelligence programming, where the machine would get to know you in real time and it adjusts itself specifically to each individual, whether you're 97 or a 10-year-old or a professional athlete. We're working more and more with professional sports teams because they can recover much faster after an injury and also after training. And they moderate their training. They don't overtrain. There's a tremendous amount of projects that we have in our R&D section, and some of those I just told you about. So real-time physiological monitoring is the next thing. So that would be sort of similar to autonomous driving car, where this machine would actually get to know your physiology in real time, set itself precisely to the individual using it at that moment.
So from the Ayurvedic perspective, when we talk about health and healing, there's really two directions. There's Shodhana and Shamana. So there's cleansing or detox, meaning you're working up against an edge and you're challenging a system, and you're going to have some catabolic processes happening as you break things down to remodel them. And then there's Shamana, which is palliation, the idea that the person's system is so weak that it's really not a good time for detox or for catabolism, but you really need to just support tissues in place for recovery. And I'm wondering, how does Vasper balance either choosing by protocol? How do you design a protocol, or by person, or how do you make the differentiation between in the technology for either challenging the system and keeping a person along their growing edge, or kind of supporting them in place for recovery?
Well, we have hundreds of different combinations on how you set the machine. So you have the resistance on the device, the intensity of exercise, the level of compression. You can combine those in different ways to, for example, enable a 97-year-old, which is our oldest user, to benefit from the same machine as a soldier or a professional athlete who is totally fit and benefits greatly from the same piece of equipment. So at our facility in Silicon Valley, we see between 50 and 60 people every day. And quite often you would see an athlete right next to him on another machine. There would be a 7-year-old with a multiple sclerosis. Of course, when you watch them, they definitely look a lot different when they do their protocols, but the benefit is very similar, and it's quite amazing to see the camaraderie and the community that has developed here, because we see people here that you would never see in any gym or exercise facility. People that show up with wheelchairs, and we have leg stabilizers where we can work with paraplegics or people recovering from stroke. We've had some amazing results with people who've been suffering from Lyme disease, and they are not able to exercise pretty much at all. Some of them are bedridden. So it's amazing to see somebody like that in 2 to 3 weeks start walking and then start to run, and all of a sudden regain this quality of the life that possibly was unattainable any other way.
That's remarkable. And we have patients at our clinic. We have a Vasper at our clinic here in Seattle, and we do have a number of ALS patients in various degrees of capacity who use it. We have the special gloves that you've recommended we get so that people's hands can be set to the parameters on the machine.
Absolutely.
That's phenomenal. If you're enjoying our conversation today with Peter Wasowski about Vasper, please be sure to share it with your friends and rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free also to check out our other shows. We talk about everything. You can get the details about our clinic and our services we offer, including Vasper, through our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. And remember to find out more about Peter Wasowski and Vasper at vasper.com. What about for trauma? We know that the mind drives a lot of our physiology. So I'm wondering what your experiences have been with Vasper for early and chronic PTSD.
Yes, absolutely. There's research going on in Colorado Springs with post-traumatic stress, and we don't refer to it as disorder, PTSD. I don't like the terminology because I believe that terminology PTSD is basically serving the drug companies that develop the drugs to treat. But post-traumatic stress or depression or different kinds of issues, hormonal balance is very, very closely tied to emotional balance. So when you're hormonally balanced, you're emotionally balanced as well. So we've seen significant results with soldiers. In fact, where we are located, it's called NASA Research Park, but it used to be a military base. It was a Navy aircraft base called Moffett Field. So we see soldiers here all the time with post-traumatic stress issues. They have amazing turnarounds. Absolutely. I mean, I could tell you many stories. Absolutely amazing turnarounds. Last year, we had a young man who was 22 years old, suicidal from depression. In less than 3 weeks, he became a completely different person.
Wow. And how often do you recommend Vasper be used?
We always provide 3 free sessions that have to be done during 1 week. So we see some cumulative effect if you do it 3 times in 1 week. We see a significant cumulative effect if you can do it 10 times within 3 weeks. And the youngest child that we've had on Vasper is 10 years old. And this was a young boy who had a pituitary issues and was not growing at all. He was growing 0.5 millimeter per month. And after 1 month on Vasper, he grew 9 millimeters.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, that's what I said. And then we went to see the pediatric endocrinologist. And she was not impressed at all. She said, well, how do you know it's not a growth spurt? I said, yeah, you're probably right. I don't know what we got all excited about. It's possibly a growth spurt. And then, so the father wasn't in the picture. The grandfather kept bringing him for Vasper. And then his 18-year-old sister was in a rollover car accident and broke her neck. Luckily, didn't injure the cord, but she was in a halo traction for about 4 months. So there was nobody to bring for his Vasper session, and his growth rate went straight down to what it was before. When he started coming back, it went back up again. So we knew that it was definitely Vasper related. And then we had pediatricians in Colorado duplicate that on some kids.
What ages?
In that age, 10, 11, 12 years old. If you have somebody younger than 10, it may be difficult to fit them into a machine. I actually thought about designing a pediatric version of Vasper. There has to be interest from that community and, of course, some funding to make that happen. It's wonderful to see children do that, especially when this young boy, when he started growing, his demeanor and everything about that boy changed. He was already a very good soccer player, but after he started using Vasper, he just took off. His grandfather did a website, and there were videos of how this kid improved. It comes to especially older men. When I was developing this thing in my lab on the Big Island in Hawaii, I had 5 guinea pigs, and they were all men, and they were all actually older than me. I was 50 then. I was 50 years old, and they were 60, 65, 70, and so forth. And after about 3 months of them coming on a regular basis, one of the wives shows up. And she sat in front of me and she says, Peter, I need to talk to you. I don't think you know the meaning of menopause. Do you know the meaning of menopause? And I said, of course I do. And she says, no, you don't. She says, menopause means men on pause. What have you done to my husband? I've been married to him for 20 years. He was normal. Now he just wants sex all the time. What have you done? So that was my first indication that we are doing something to the endogenous side of the endocrine system, because we set him out to have his testosterone levels checked, and he was off the charts. So today we have a 78-year-old who comes here, 76 or 78. He's one of those. And he's a dentist, still running a dental practice in Palo Alto. He's a triathlete. He is a world champion in his age group, triathlete. His testosterone level is 906.
Wow.
906 at 78 years old. Increased libido is one of the highly reported side effects. And of course, men talk about it much more freely than women. We don't have a lot of data with women, but there is a IVF specialist in New York that is interested in getting Vasper and studying that.
Yeah, that would be excellent.
We've had some amazing results with people who've been suffering from Lyme disease, and they are not able to exercise pretty much at all. Some of them are bedridden. So it's amazing to see somebody like that in 2 to 3 weeks start walking and then start to run and all of a sudden regain this quality of the life that possibly was unattainable any other way. You know, our human is basically a human animal. So when we've designed this thing, we sort of design it to bring out your animal instinct. When you're hormonally balanced and you're emotionally balanced, you start thinking from inside out as well. So if you can imagine an animal finding a pile of sugar in a forest, the instinct would tell the animal not to eat that because it wouldn't end well. Mm-hmm. And we live in this age of social media where, you know, we're bombarded by advice from different sources on how to sleep, how to eat. All of those things are interesting sometimes to listen to, but the person who is giving you the advice, the only thing they're doing is they're reporting what worked for them individually. So 3 things can happen. One is that it will also work for you. The other one is that it may not make any difference. And the third one is that it may actually take you backwards. Mm-hmm. So what we find is after people do 10 sessions within 3 weeks, they actually, their bodies tell them how often they should use the Vasper, which protocol actually works best for them, and how they can adjust the protocol to continue using it. So more than half of our machines, close to half, that come out of our factory go to private homes. Huh. And people use them every day, and we had incredible feedback. Not just from adults, but also from young people, because you know, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I don't remember sitting more than 5 minutes. And right now, all these kids sit in front of screens for hours and hours and hours. And I think that also leads to hormonal imbalance because they're not moving enough. And that leads to emotional imbalance as well.
Yeah.
So.
And we've even seen that research is showing when children are more active when they're young or as adolescents, it decreases dementia and Alzheimer's risk later in life. So the idea that we need to move our muscles at every minute of every day when we're kids, as we are driven to, children are following their appropriate instinct when they're not sitting in their seat.
Yes. So there is this effect of the screens that we need to address, not with drugs, but with movement. And this is one way to do this. So we actually have equipment installed in a private high school in Southern California. The plan is to start working with especially children with behavioral issues that are acting out, and then see if we can get them hormonally balanced and they will like themselves better and be much better to others as well.
In another of our shows on this podcast, we've talked about how health is really determined by our social and our political environments. So we need, as our social and political environments get complex, as we're made to sit inside, as we don't have resources, we need other outlets to drive our physiology. And Vasper sure seems like one option. You know, it's not going to necessarily fix our economic inequality, but if it can help people to think better within their system, within their body, then we've got a shot.
Yes, and it's also important to realize that, you know, our thoughts create our reality. So when we get hormonally out of balance and then we go into the negative thoughts, that actually has a very direct and immediate chemical impact on hormones. Of course, cortisol, the catabolic hormones that actually is destructive, and other hormones. So this is why we cannot look at a human body the same way a mechanic would look at a piece of machinery. A piece of machinery is very predictable and very easy to fix. Human body, you know, because we are this advanced animal with complex thoughts, you know, depending what is going through your head may actually depend how healthy you are or how healthy you will be next 2 hours or next 2 weeks or next 2 months. Yeah, human body was definitely designed for movement. And if you If you go way back into the caveman age, a human being was able to outlast an animal and chase it until the animal had to rest and the human being could actually catch up with it and kill it. So we have completely lost that ability.
Yeah, I can tell you with surety that I am not chasing down, and I cannot outrun any animal.
Right.
Except maybe a narcoleptic iguana.
Well, this is the beautiful thing is that this technology will give you a benefit of significant amount of exercise that may take 1.5 to 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And you get that benefit in 20 minutes while you're sitting on a chair and you're being cool, you're not sweating, mm-hmm. and you're actually having fun. We have this formula for happiness that we go by here. Usually people always are interested, how do I be happy? And the formula goes like this. If you want to be happy for 5 minutes, take a nap. If you want to be happy for 2 weeks, go on vacation. If you want to be happy from time to time, you may have a drink, whatever it is that gives you pleasure. But if you want continuous happiness in life and continuous gratification in life, keep creating positive difference in the lives of others. So many people that I've met that have not gotten in touch with that. They could be millionaires and billionaires and have all of the resources to be happy, but they are not, because they're not contributing to others. And this is precisely what we do. A glorious way to live.
Thank you for listening today with Peter Wasowski. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can get more information from and about us on our website, centerforhealingneurology.com, or even better, come see us in person at our Seattle-based clinic. You can also find out more about Peter and the Vasper at vasper.com. He's got lots of research and articles and videos to watch. Please be sure to share this show with your friends, and we welcome your rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. And feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. Vasper seems like a really, really helpful piece of that. So thank you, Peter. We rise or fall together, and we're committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.